Hello, Dojo family. Talk about family. I'm sitting
Mm.
here with one of my nearest and dearest friends, sister, allies, teacher, woman I consider family, Rachel Pringle. We've been walking together for 7 or 8 years now, at least. And I'm actually staying in her home at the moment. And I really feel Rachel and her husband, Johan, as my OG soul family and community tribe here in LA. Some of the first individuals that I met when I moved here to California, and I have just witnessed you, Rachel, rise in your shine, rise in your service, rise in your leadership, rise in how you stand for the women in your life. Starting with your sisters. I've really witnessed that. Now you stand for the women in your life in the form of a multitude of clients as a tantrika. I don't know if you would call yourself this, but I would, a sexual awakening guide, a medicine woman in your own right, the medicine of sexuality, of sacred sexuality, and being willing to go to the territories that we deem no-go zones. I want to go there today with you on the Dojo podcast, right to the root. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means. But I feel so inspired by you and your leadership as a wild woman, the wild woman dance experience that you've created, and just rewinding underneath the facilitation and the professional expression in the world, but just to who you be as a sister, and the way that I've witnessed you stand relentlessly for both yourself, to be the best sister you can for yourself through self-love, like ultimate. It sounds cliche at this point. Oh, self-love, self-love. I feel like you could have written the book on self-love. And I really get and can see how that depth of anchoring that you've created for yourself in your own self-love practices since I've known you has translated to the way that you are able to love the women and men, but from my firsthand experience, the women around you, and just really stand as the ultimate cheerleader, booster, champion, ally for the sisters in your life. And there's a lot to say in all of these categories. But first, I'd love to invite your voice and hear a deeper dive around your why for being here today and what's inspiring you the most to share with the Dojo audience.
Thank you so much, my love, for that beautiful intro. It's such an honor and pleasure to be here, to be of service in any way and every way that I can, and just inspired really by this like moment in time. It feels like a very special, interesting, intriguing moment of time where women are really at the forefront of this catalytic change that the world is going through. And it's exhilarating and exciting. And it looks all these different ways, and I think we didn't think it was going to look. And for me in this moment, what feels inspiring is like learning how to, what you express sexuality. And yes, that is a huge part. But for me, it really is sacred sensuality
Mm-hmm.
and being in our senses and learning how to speak the language of our senses and to be in tune with our senses and the senses of our surroundings and the people, and use all of that raw material to create moment to moment transformation and to be in the energy of like everything is okay, everything is for us, everything is here conspiring for our greatest awakening. And how do we surrender in the most powerful and profound way and meet ourselves in that let go. I wrote a whole bunch of poetry this morning, and like everything is all about surrender and letting go of these masks that we think we're supposed to be and who we think we're supposed to be in the world, and coming into who we really are. And that can only be revealed from my perspective in a moment.
Yeah. What would you say is the difference between sensuality and sexuality? And why do you feel more inclined towards using the language sacred sensual?
Yeah, I love that question because obviously, I mean, I'm absolutely infatuated and obsessed with everything sexuality related. And to me, my whole experience and the way that I I associate to the world is through my senses. I am a sensual being.
Yeah.
That's just like my make. And, when people come to me to work with me, I'm not going to teach you about sexuality. I'm going to teach you about how to be with the sensory experience of the totality of the moment. And that will lead you to your sexuality. And
Hmm.
that will lead you to ecstatic moments of eroticism and bliss and orgasmic bliss and, your business and your relationships and all those things. But it's really about the sensory experience of you in the moment, right? How to meet a moment, how to understand when you're contracted, when you're expanded, how to use the contraction to open into expansion. And to me, that is a sensual experience. So it's like getting out of just being in that one focused arena, but like using like and the energetic of our senses, right? Like when we walk into a room, we're not walking into the room with our sexuality, we're walking into the room with our senses.
Hmm.
And so, and then we can use our senses to dictate how we want to express our sexuality in that room. Speaking of
Yeah. Uh-huh.
that.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I feel that. I feel that deeply. It's an important distinction, you know.
Mhm,
And the one thing that it stuck out to me that you named in there is to use a contraction to open into expansion.
yeah.
Using a contraction to open into expansion. And not that I think we can get that there is a blanketed formula, but perhaps we actually can get a little formulaic or just get
Yeah.
underneath that a little bit more. Because I know I was sharing with you before we hit record. I woke up this morning just out of the blue and such like feeling such deep contraction and such dense energy, and for me, one ingredient in the equation I noticed was being able to notice where I was resisting how I was feeling and the way I wanted to
Mhm,
escape and get out of it through whatever, reaching to my phone, getting lost in thought, whatever it was. And it wasn't until I just accepted how I was feeling. And I was just like,
mhm,
okay, I accept where I'm at today. I accept how I feel today. And then my internal dialogue could shift to, I'm here with you in this contraction. I know you want to figure out what it is or where it's coming from or how to get out of it. And right now you can't, and that's okay. And I'll be here for
mhm,
as long as you need, no matter what, for as long as it takes. And you can feel this. You know what I mean? Like the
mhm,
only way out is through, and just being able to accept that the contraction is there, the feelings that are present, and open as those feelings and just be with them no matter how uncomfortable they are, for me has been a gateway
mhm.
to being in a contraction and finding that expansion. And I'm wondering for you if there's anything in your own world that just feels like, okay, like for me, acceptance is one key. Are there any keys that support you specifically?
Yeah, I think there's two things in there that are so important because there is sort of like a formula that I like to work with, if you can call it a formula, but like going again back to like the sensory experience, to be really in tune with what our body is guiding us towards. Like we can feel when a contraction happens, like, ooh, there's a tightness in my belly or a heaviness in my chest, or maybe my jaw is tight, or I feel, something is restricted, my breath, my voice, right? Okay, where did that come from? Right? Tracking that. Where did that, like, what was the thought that created that? What was the conversation? What was the interaction, right? Like being able to see and oh, actually it started to develop when I read that email from that person that made me feel okay, and sort of follow that. I like to, and I'll say the blanket on top of all of this is to have a curiosity at the forefront of everything that we do. Curiosity, or I like to say, like, even fascination, like to be fascinated by our own experience, so that there is a state of observing or the witness. So there is an energy of removal. So we're not in the thick of it. We're just watching, like, ooh, interesting. Where did this contraction come from? Okay, so it came from this email. And what am I picking up? Oh, there's this interaction that reminds me of this, perhaps an interaction I used to have with my mother or my father or my caregiver or whatever it is, or my ex-boyfriend or my best friend, and then, oh, I'm feeling this sort of thing. So we can sort of go towards, like, the bunch of necklaces that are all tied together, and just sort of like pick them up and look at them,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because if you have a couple necklaces, if you try to pull them apart, what do they get? They get more tangled. We need to take like a wide bird's eye view to look at it, spread it around, kind of see, oh, this is coming from this place and this is coming from this place. Okay, let me open it wide. And
Mm-hmm.
then going into the awareness to what you said, that there are days and times where what we're experiencing is unexplainable, and how can we be with that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think it's exactly what you said: acceptance, and not trying to fix it, solve it, and not letting it take you into a downward spiral,
Yeah.
right? And I think that that's a huge thing, you know, in my existence, is like, are you upward spiraling or are you downward spiraling? Downward spiraling feels like quicksand. It feels like, and you bring people into it. If you got people in your sphere, they're going to come down with you, and it's not pretty. It doesn't feel good to anyone involved. And when we're in an upward spiral, it is curiosity, it's fascination, it's interesting. You know,
Mm-hmm.
this morning, similar to you, as we expressed before, like I was like, ooh, okay, something's here. And it was like, okay, let me do my normal tracking. Let's see. And I'm like, oh, ask, oh, I'm in a changing of the seasons. It's the solstice tomorrow. It's the end of the year. It's holiday season. Like, this is a natural time for us to be having
Yeah.
this cyclical feeling, right?
Mm-hmm.
And instead of needing to solve it or make it mean something, or make it, try to understand it, can we just be with it, and can we make space for it, and can we actually, you know, like, celebrate this part of us
Mm-hmm.
versus deeming it bad and ugly, right? Which brings us into like moving out of right and wrong, and moving into just fluidity and prismatic energy, which is, this is just a gateway. When we're going into a contraction and then into expansion, like, we never really know what part we're in because it's always moving, right? But the human mind wants to understand it. I think that that's, you know, a beautiful thing and a dangerous thing when we're too attached to it.
Yeah, it's an interesting dance, especially when something comes in and it's hard to it's hard to pin where did it come in from, and there's lots of necklaces and lots of things going on, plus layered on top of it the season of winter, and it's very
Yeah,
interesting. Right now I'm in Los Angeles, you're in Miami, it's sunny, they are not very seasonal places, whereas last year at
yeah.
this time I was in Boulder, Colorado, and it was
Mm,
like, wow, the first time I had been in a winter season in a long time, like since I grew up in St. Louis. Besides that, I hadn't lived in a place that was seasonal. And there was something,
yeah.
I had this thought yesterday around the time this energy, I started feeling it. And it's like, wow, there's something in my system in December and January, and the deepest in the Western hemisphere, at least the deepest, darkest night, right? The longest night of the year at the solstice that occurs, that you want to like cave, and there's something
Hmm.
dying, and like you said, that's natural. And there's that
Yeah.
quote I love that's like, let the dead leaves drop. And
Yes.
so the tree's not trying to figure out why the dead leaf is dropping, and why that leaf had to die, and thinking about all the stories about why the leaf had to go. That tree is focusing on bringing all of its resource and all of its energy and attention to the root.
Yes.
And so the aspens, when I go skiing on chairlifts and it's frozen over and there's snow, I'm like, those trees are alive. Those trees
Yes.
are resilient as fuck. They bring
Hmm.
all their life force energy right to that root, let all the dead leaves drop. And then that becomes this like unfuckwithable base and foundation, that the refreshing energy of spring, where then the vital nutrients, when they come from outside again, from the sun and
Yeah.
the rain, and now the tree can like bask in the vital nutrients coming from outside, but it knows it has
Yeah.
that internal fortitude, that internal resource, that internal strength to survive the winter. So it's an
Yeah.
internally resourced being that
Yeah.
allows for the external resource to come in so that it can flourish and flower even more, just like the external resource of our seasons of spring and summer, when we have community and family and tribe and we're being supported. Yeah, I fully receive that, and it only supports me
Yeah.
in blossoming more. And it's really important during this season of winter that all of us are going through, whether we're in a seasonal location or not, that we utilize this time intentionally
Yeah.
to let the dead leaves drop. And if it feels
Yeah.
like the dead of winter and there's not so much external resourcing happening, this is the opportunity to build that fortitude inside, to build that strength inside, to get stronger in the gym of your own self sourcing, to be able to be with the discomfort of, I don't know what this energy is, but like I'm here with it
To
and
not judge it.
and not judge it. I'm here with it and I can do it, you know? So this actually brings me right to the root, which is an area that which is an area I'd really love to dig into with you. And I wonder if you would just be willing to share about the Root Revolution course that you and Angel created and where your original draw to doing root work came from and what that even means to you.
Yeah, it's and root work, for those of you who are listening, that we were specifically working with, all of the roots, so the anus and the perineum, and not just working with our pussy, which is so incredible and something that we focus on, but the anus can be ignored and it can be also put into this like very shameful space. And I've had incredibly beautifully powerful, extremely powerful experiences through anal pleasure, and it's very taboo. And I think that Angel and I really just had a beautiful conversation on my daybed in Topanga one day, and we wanted to touch these edgier parts of ourselves, because when we think about it internally, like it's the base of the spine, it's the root chakra, it's where the cerebral spinal fluid flows up from, it's our kundalini, it's our shakti, it's of endless fascination to me, especially because I've had very spiritual experiences, spiritual slash sexual orgasmic experiences that come from a deeply surrendered state past sort of what we know as humans of what pleasure is supposed to look like, from pornography or from movies or from books. It's just like we get together, we fuck, that's it. And we're missing all of this like ancient lineage traditions, and you go into Taoism and like, there's so much around this area that is ignored, and then not only ignored, shamed, or told is dirty and wrong and bad. And oftentimes I think we're realizing that the things that are wrong and bad are often some of the most magical experiences, right? They just need to be brought into the light, right? It's like shadow work, Yeah. It's like we get to look at exploring all parts of ourselves, and specifically with pleasure. I mean, in the course, it was so incredible just to get out of a routine that we're in, right? Similar to what we're talking about before. It's like we can sort of get into these routines specifically with pleasure or specifically with healing. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to, instead of being endlessly curious, and I like curiosity is at the forefront of my path, because then I keep going towards the unknown spaces with excitement versus with fear. And the pleasure zones in that area are radical, and sexual energy is so important for our healing. And whenever we're experiencing something really fearful, it gets trapped in our root, from any sort of trauma, from a physical trauma, from any sort of abuse, from a car accident, from a physical accident, from an emotional accident, it gets locked in this root. And we're talking about, the body keeps the score. This is something very prevalent in our community as teachers, as coaches, and yet this area is still not spoken about because it's really scary. It's very taboo. Okay, talk about the anus. We can't talk about that. It's dirty. It's gross. It's bad. There's so much shame around it. And so, Angel and I, fellow Scorpios, we both have had incredible experiences, and we just wanted to go deep into it. And the result was absolutely, utterly profound. And it's just the beginning for us. We're just scratching the surface of realizing, like, I think that when people hear this, it's, of course, there is sexuality and sensuality connected to it. And it's really about the amount of healing that was done in this space to be able to touch that part of you that society is telling you is so wrong, gross, disgusting, dirty. And turns out is an access point to so much healing, so much power, so much self-reckoning, self-realization, self-actualization, and then on top of that, extreme pleasure and in ways that like were mind-blowing to both of us and all of us in the group.
Wow. And so are there any like beginner's guide to
Yes.
unlocking your relationship with the root and the anus? Like I can
Yeah.
feel in my system. I very rarely, you and Angel have inspired me to be talking about it right now. So
Yeah.
it's uncommon for me in my life.
Yes.
And I'm a liberation artist. I love to go into the no-go zones. And this is one that it's like almost like been so in the shadow and so taboo that it hasn't
Yes.
even occurred to me. We use it
Yeah.
every day, multiple times a day sometimes, and that feels good. And so it's
It
like,
feels great.
yeah. And so it's really interesting that we don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so this
Yeah.
is like kind of like really kind of melting that surface layer of protection for anyone listening to
Yeah.
really like open and get curious about this part of your body that is quite literally the root point of your whole
Mm-hmm.
system, right? The root chakra, the
Yeah.
space of safety, stability, foundation, everything
Yes.
grows from this place. And so for
Yeah.
those who are just now like even realizing like, wow, I really don't ever talk about that. Like what are some beginners and beginning ways to engage?
I love it. I think I'm going to start real beginner because people can get nervous around this, which
Yeah.
is totally normal. It's just thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's just addressing that area, bringing your awareness there, bringing your attention there, and seeing what reveals itself really. And it's like it's it's bigger and also more simple than we can realize because let's take our pussy, for example, our beautiful sacred yoni. We pee, we bleed. Those at times could also be seen as gross or disgusting. And periods were for so many years. Now we've seen that our period blood is so incredibly powerful. It's so healing. It has so many stem cells in it. So it's just realizing that there's programming in place.
Mm-hmm.
And so bringing our awareness to our own programming, right? To come face to face with extreme compassion and a gentle, tender nature of like, what is the programming or conditioning that I'm holding in that area? What are the thoughts that arise when I think about it? Are my first thoughts like, ew, that's disgusting or that's gross? Why do I have that thought? Where did it come from? Where did it stem from? Similar to the process that we came up before, like question our own beliefs, right? Like, where did this come from? Did this come from a past lover or parent or a movie, because that's placed a lot as well, like in movies they talk about anal like in a really not so nice way. So it's like, where are we picking up these beliefs and where are we holding
Yes.
someone else's idea on our own body?
Mm-hmm.
That's the real conversation starter, right? Like I just like let that land for us. Like, where are we holding? Where are we allowing someone else outside of us to make a decision about how we see our own body,
Mm-hmm.
right? So once we get that, then we can sort of explore again with compassion and with tenderness, like what does it feel like to get reacquainted to that area?
Mm-hmm.
Right? To bring love to that area the same way that you would bring love to your arms and your breasts,
Mm-hmm.
right? And breast massage has become such a huge phenomena in our industry, for a reason. Our whole body is incredibly intelligent and orgasmic. It is not just, the air, it's also your nostrils, your earlobes. So especially when an area is holding that much quote unquote like negativity or shadow or taboo, it's very likely hiding something really fucking amazing,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's the same way that that the yoni was with the sacredness of blood. So I would say for those who are wanting to step in, that is the first step. And then the second step is really just like bringing her into your awareness. Like there are exercises that we do that just get you accustomed to that area. And it's not about anything like the exercises that we do is like same with Kegels, right? Why do you exercise this? Not just to like, make the muscle of your yoni strong or your pussy strong. It's to bring awareness to your power center, which is at the base of your spine for all of us, for men, women, people, whoever you are. So it's not just for women, it's not just for men, it's for everyone. So bringing the awareness, right? Like using that muscle, becoming aware, because oftentimes, same with the yoni, that area is numb, or we have no sensation, we have no awareness there. So whenever we do perhaps want to approach anal play, even with ourselves, it can feel really scary, it can feel really tight because we don't have awareness there.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So having the gentleness, the compassion, the tenderness to explore it, same way that you would do Kegels with your yoni, you can do Kegels with your anus. And that is just exercising your Shakti Kundalini energy, reacquainting you to an ancient intelligence that is connected to something beyond what we can see and feel in our human body. So those two things are a start off. And again, it seems simple, and we want it to be a little bit more complex, but often the most beautiful things are hiding in plain sight.
Yeah. Oh, I hear that. Well said. Well said. And I mean, I really feel your embodied integrity around this work, like the shame-free space that you're speaking from is so potent and so embodied and so clear. And so I'm wondering, what has that journey been like for you to come from the shadow expression of sexuality? Like, what did that look like? Rewind the script, and Rachel in her late teens, early 20s, mid 20s, how did how did the shadow shamey expression of sexuality look, and what was the catalyst that you would consider to be a major catalyst for your awakening process or your sexual awakening that started to lead to the healing of the shame stories within yourself? For anyone listening, I'm sure, I mean, I can feel my own layers of shame still held around sexuality, and
all
just
of us
owning it and rocking it, and the way that gets reflected through family members. And like, it's like, wow, like to really own it. And I see a lot of what you post on socials is so sensual and fully sexually expressed. And like this, like really erotic, you wrote a book of erotic poetry. There's like a real eroticism that your parents were reading. Right. So it's like, there's
mom helped me edit it.
your mom helped you edit, right? Like that's so amazing to have that kind of support and relationship with your parents. And so what has that journey looked like for you? So like rewind it back and kind of give us the arc.
It's interesting because there's so much yes in that, because yes, I'm so blessed with two incredible parents that were very they created such a liberated and free space for me to be born into. And the shadow aspect of that for me, how it showed up was, I think, a projection onto me, because I was a sensual from the get-go. This is just my code, part of who I am and who I've always been. I've been a nudist since I can remember, and I was celebrated in that, thankfully and luckily. And through that, when I got older, there was an understanding or awareness. I'm just gonna plug my charger in. There was an understanding and awareness that that I was supposed to know what I was doing sexually, because I was sensual and because I was in my body, that there was a lot of like, exactly what you're doing. And I didn't for the majority of my life. And so that was a whole level of shame of like, sort of feeling myself through it. And then there's like, there's pornography and things, and then there's like the part of you that's like, oh, maybe that's what I should be doing, but then there's a part of you that knows, but that doesn't feel right, but there's a part of you that likes it, and you're confused. I would say that in general, most of us are confused around our sexuality. I was for many, many, many years. And when I think about the first times that I had experiences with anal play, it was when I was intoxicated. when I, had been drinking or maybe experimenting with drugs, and I would give myself permission to actually do the thing that I wanted. It was with one particular guy who was older than me and who we had a really beautiful, special connection. And I'm so grateful for him. That was the only person that I had that experience with before Johan, my husband.
Yeah.
But just seeing that all those times were in the dark, right? They were shadowed, there was still shame. And it wasn't until really getting with Johan that I started to unwind all of that, because it is, I would say that's the blanket. There is this like illusion in our society that like we're supposed to know exactly what we're doing.
Yeah.
And we don't. And, in the older traditions, you were trained into these practices. Mm-hmm. Everyone was trained. The women were trained, the people were trained, the men were trained. I want that to come back. That's what I'm here to help bring back, because then we actually can eliminate that energy of shame, because shame comes from like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know if, am I supposed to like this? Ooh, I like this, but it seems wrong and bad, but no one's talking about it. So it must be, and there's all this energy. And then with Johan, he's so open. He just outed it all and was like, this is something that I like. I want to experiment with. And I remember, we're here and we might as well have this conversation. I remember the first time I had an orgasm from anal, and it was an unbelievable experience of orgasmic pleasure that put me into a state of hysterical laughter. Hysterical. Like I cackled because it was such a deep, and I'm saying this for people who have had that type of orgasmic experience where it moves you into such an emotional state that you go into hysterics. You're just like, what is happening to my body? I didn't even know that this was possible. And then that was like the entry point. And then the added stuff of like, oh, when you're going down there, sometimes there are things, you are a little dirty. And Johan didn't think anything of it. He was like, oh, okay, let's clean you up and then we'll go right back to it. Yeah. He destigmatized all of what I was holding. And I think that's the reason why, and I'm going to be fully honest, like having this conversation does feel scary because, there's a part of me that's like, oh, I hope this is okay, right? And I want to talk about it because it is normal, right? This like it is okay. Our desires are okay. It doesn't mean everyone's going to want to do it, but can we normalize communicating about our desires? Right? That's what's coming through.
Yes.
For deeply. Can we normalize our desires? Because when we don't, that's when repression, suppression, and really a lot of ugly shit comes through. That's right. Instead of just like having safe spaces to talk about it and then realize that, oh my God, there's a reason why men are having sex in their ass all the time. It's because it feels fucking amazing.
Yeah.
There's a reason the divine made this center with like all these incredible pleasure points and neurons, and it's like incredibly awakening and a very spiritual experience. Like, why can't we just talk about it?
Yeah, right? we are talking about it. And I really honor, I see you in that. And I honor, like, I'm having fun talking about this. And I really appreciate your willingness and courage to lead the way in that, and like, I mean, it's one thing when it's like with our girlfriends and we're talking about it over, playing some cards, cause we're grandmas, but there's, the talking about it publicly on a podcast where you don't know who's listening, but I'm like kind of excited that we don't know who's listening. Because the women and men listening, this is going to be a normalizing, loving, energetic that I feel like is deeply invitational. And, one thing I will say is that in my experiences of anal pleasure in my life, it's always and only been with men that I've dated for long, long periods of time where there's been a field of love and trust present that's been built.
100%.
Yeah. So that I think is its own healing energy, where being with somebody who loves you and who is loving you in that way, no matter whether it's, anal sex or or
Yeah.
through the yoni or whatever, it to be in a field of loving, I feel like is its own transmuter of shame, you know?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I feel like a lot of shame comes from sexual experiences where that field of love
Yes.
was not present.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, like, any thoughts around,
Yes.
individuals who are calling that in and who want their own, partnership that can actually hold that field of love, because the field of love itself kind of repatterns
Yes.
old experiences of sexual engagements that we're trying to fill a void, or with
Hmm.
partners who couldn't hold the space for an emotional experience to happen, or partners who where the love wasn't present because the love for yourself wasn't present at the time.
Hmm.
Can that be okay? And can we how do we repattern and heal that even if we don't
Mm.
have a partner?
Oh, this is such a good question. And let's preface everything with, like, when it comes to this sort of play and engagement,
Yeah.
the most important thing is safety.
Yeah.
Like, the most crucial
Yeah.
thing is safety. Safety and consent, right? In all of this. And I think specifically with exactly what you said, experiences, sexual experiences in the past that have, you know, traumatized us deeply, right? Because we've said yes too soon, or we just felt like we had to because that was what was happening. And I would actually say that for those who are single, like, it's a perfect foundation to just get to know this part of you. And for those of you who are in partnership, when it comes to playing with these areas, I would actually encourage you to do it on your own first before you invite it in with
Yeah.
partnership, because it is very sensitive. And something that Angel and I work specifically with in that area is, like, learning how to feel a yes and feel a no in your body first and foremost,
Yeah.
when it comes to safety, and then learning from that place how to express it, right? Like, we get to feel these places on our own. And sometimes, when we're in partnership, we can get swept up in the excitement, and we don't actually slow down in the way that we could when we're on our own. So there is great power to being on our own and being in these beautiful, sacred, safe pleasure practice arenas where we just get to explore and really be with those questions of tightness or numbness, or trauma, and to hold ourselves and not need to rush. Because oftentimes, no matter if you have the most incredible partner, which I do and you have had, like, we can still want to rush,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, can we just take the space for this to just be us and us, and explore? And then when we do have a partner, to be able to be in the practice of expressing our desires, right? Which goes back to exactly what we're saying. And that is an art form. And that's an art form that I wish that all of us can continuously learn and expand for ourselves. Because when we can feel it in our body, and the yes and no is moment to moment, right? Sometimes what was a yes yesterday is a no today.
Yeah.
And to be able to speak, right, to what we were saying in the beginning of the call, to learn the language of your body and to speak to it in the moment with yourself first and foremost, and then with your partner, or dare I say partners,
Uh-huh.
in a who knows what's happening. That is a superpower. That's where we get to create the experiences that we
Yeah.
really, really want, because we're all seeking peak experiences. That's why we're here. We
Yeah.
want to feel aliveness. And oftentimes when we have those peak experiences and then we experience a trauma, we associate that thing with trauma, versus, no, it was perhaps going beyond your edge, saying yes when you weren't ready yet. Like, all of those things, I really believe we get to retrain that for ourselves first, alone,
Yeah.
and then in partnership.
Totally. And this is first of all, again, we talked about acceptance earlier in the call and how we're all humans learning together.
Yes.
We're humans learning and growing, and we are in the category here with eroticism and sexuality and sensuality, very sensitive territory
Yes.
where a lot of
Yes.
violation energy has occurred and is still
Hmm.
present in the field, where there's deep trauma, ancestral
Hmm.
in the DNA that may not have even happened, to you personally, but was something that is being carried through your mother's line, and you're like,
Yeah.
why do I feel scared? Why do I feel closed? Why am I
Yes.
saying yes still when really this is a no? And there's the dovetailing as well of people pleasing patterns and the fear of hurting somebody's feelings, or creating a rejection wound in somebody
Yes.
else. So we reject ourselves so that we don't reject somebody else. And it reminds me of an example. And first of all, I want to say that this is where the learning and growing and healing is happening,
Yes.
right? So we don't repeat these same scenarios that created sexual trauma in the past. And I feel like in order to really change and shift and gain confidence, we have to be able to forgive ourselves, and for that to be
Yes.
on a foundation of self-compassion and self-acceptance for the you that didn't have the tools before, for the you, all
Yes.
those scenes that you might remember in sexual
Yes.
scenarios that were not in full alignment that you participated in anyway, and,
Yes.
I'm not, it will look different for everybody, but to
Yeah.
start the reframing of the way that you look at yourself from past
Yes.
memories of sexual experiences where you didn't have the muscle or the clarity or the awareness or just the knowing, the access to your own truth
Yes.
in the moment. And I feel like that can make it really scary to try these new things, or we have these body memory, that somatic
Hmm.
memory is like, no, 10 years ago when I had that one experience with that one person where I didn't say no because I didn't have the tools to do that or even know that my no was a no. And that was such
Yes.
a impactful, violating experience for me that I violated myself because I didn't even know how to own that. That now 10 years later, I don't, my whole body's like,
I'm
just
still holding it. Yeah.
still holding that. And I just want to name, there was an experience that I had, which was really interesting to see. It was soon after Oren and I broke up, and that was a 4-year relationship. And it was within like a month and a half of the relationship ending, I went to this retreat, and there were sensual experiences happening with men and women. And I was in the early part of the retreat. I was partnered with a man that the practice was one of the first practices where they were actually having us like touch one another, like our like hand, like just the very PG. But this was
Hmm.
my first sensual experience with a man after ending a nearly 4-year relationship with the only man I had been with for 4 years, right?
Yeah.
And I was going through heartbreak, and I didn't want to do this practice.
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
want this man that I'm just meeting right now to be stroking my hand and my wrist and my forearm and my shoulder and like my neck, and
Hmm.
I felt this obligation,
Yes.
felt this self-judgment of like, gosh, come on, Zahara, like the guy's touching your forearm, like it's fine, like just do it, just do it. And I was so contracted and so closed, and I really pushed myself into allowing this experience to happen. And it was fully clothed, like, that's what the justifications in my mind were, because
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
want to hurt his feelings, I didn't want
Yeah.
to feel rejected, and so I was rejecting myself and judging myself
Yes.
to try to participate. And there's an edge and there's a boundary, and for me, I was like, is this just an edge or is this a boundary? Because for me, there was nobody else's boundary, but I just got out, I was just going through a heartbreak, and this was my first engagement. And listen, what happened that was a deep learning for me is afterwards, I felt I felt
Yeah.
violated, and it
Yeah.
wasn't his fault. I didn't
Yeah.
use my voice.
Yeah.
And so there was this like really deep learning for me when I got to share, when we were integrating after, how I was feeling.
Yeah.
And for him, it was really hard to hear because
Yeah.
that's coming into a space with a woman who is frozen and very confused. And this was me in the scene who I couldn't access my clarity enough to use my voice. I was scared. I was confused. I didn't want to hurt him. I didn't want to feel the feeling of hurting him. I was
Yeah.
questioning my own boundary, if it was even a real boundary. And so then I learned after that how important it is in any sensual, sexual, erotic experience no matter
Whew.
how light or PG you think it is, to use your voice. And it ended up being very powerful for this man and I as we integrated together the experience,
Yeah.
for me to get to take ownership actually of where
Yeah.
I didn't use my voice, and then
Yeah.
take that in. And the rest of the retreat for me was this major boundary dojo where I was just like left and right using my voice. Yeah, I was like holding all over the place. And it was
You
really
know,
to have that experience.
I think I love this so much because I think this is so like deeply, dramatically, and drastically important to touch upon, because this is like in our industry, right? Like in the climate of spirituality. And I believe this too. And I talk about this a lot in my work, right? Like resistance is our growth edge, and we should go towards resistance. Now, I will say this: when it comes to anything sexual and sensual, when you feel resistance, ooh, honey, you better listen to that. I would say that when it comes to anything sexual or and sensual, or anything like, meaning like, oh, I feel resistance about jumping off this building, right? Like anything like that, where it's life and death, like we got to listen to that. Now, if it's like you're going into a ritual and you feel resistance towards screaming, get over yourself and get in there and scream. Like that's your growth edge. You just feel uncomfortable because you don't want to look silly. But I would say, to go even further to the part to what you just expressed and so beautifully shared, because I think so many people can resonate with this, because there is so much work like this going around now, and it can be amazing, and it can also be super traumatic. It's like there's also the energy of like, oh come on, you're not evolved enough,
Yeah.
you could be more spiritual, you can open, and that is such fucking bullshit. And
Yeah.
it is so dangerous. And when it comes to our sexuality, exactly as you said, and you gave such a beautiful example, because it has nothing to do with like you were fully clothed. It might have not been too much, but in that moment, it was too much for you. And
Yeah.
can we, like, and it brings us back sort of full circle to everything that we've been speaking about. Like, can we get over this idea of how we are supposed to be, and instead surrender into how do I feel in the moment, right? One day you could be a total full fuck yes, and then the next day a no, and we need to honor that. Like it's deeply important, especially when doing this work, because in those moments, like we can deeply traumatize ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think the energy of like, yeah, violating ourselves, or like, I'm not going to prosecute others, so then I'm going to therefore prosecute myself. And like we have a tendency to do that over and over again, especially when a lot of us have, the ex people pleaser, which I know I certainly do. And like, we don't want to hurt people's feelings. And we have to just recognize that it's like when we can learn, I think what it's bringing us to is this awareness of, same way with the sexuality stuff, like, let us learn how to use our voice. Let us learn how to express ourselves, like responsibly, consciously, like use conscious communication, use co-devotional communication. The simplicity of just saying, I'm making up a story right now that I'm a no, and I'm making up a story that it means I'm not evolved, and that I'm like, that I'm, not spiritual, or I'm not, whatever the fucking bullshit stories that we make up. When actually right now in this moment, I'm just a no. And I want you to know it has nothing to do with you.
Yeah.
This is just me and my boundary. And
Mhm.
that can be so freeing for the person opposite, who maybe has had the exact same scenario in a different way. And you're giving them permission to be able to say no. Like, we need to give all of each other permission to just own our boundary, and it not be this like, sort of prude thing,
Yeah.
which can exist, but a really honorable thing.
Yeah.
Boundaries are fucking sexy.
Yeah, I was actually really proud of myself once I got going in the momentum
Yeah.
of my boundary dojo, but I had to have that moment of violating my own
Yeah.
boundary in that moment, just to see how not only does that hurt me, but it also hurts the person across from me, because
Yeah.
they think they're coming into a space where there's permission, when
Yeah.
really
And safety.
I'm like in a flurry of doubt and uncertainty and feeling closed. And it's really important to name that. And now to
Mm.
also into the point that you're bringing around like the uprising of tantric, sensual,
Yes.
erotic, spaces where there are these invitational, um, containers, right, to explore the full spectrum of our sexuality. And I think that it's really important to go there. I've had some of my most liberating experiences in different forms and frames
Yeah.
with these invitations to see, like, where am I just like completely frozen and cold and in control? And that's an edge that wants to be released and dissolved, with a
Mm-hmm.
partner or with another sister or with myself, and
Mm-hmm.
just be
Mm-hmm.
witnessed in
Mm-hmm.
that. And then where is there like a pressure here, or a peer pressure, or a
Yes.
collective agreement, that's this collective unconscious agreement that the most suddenly there's like the shift in the tide where it's like the more common was like this deeply devotional walk, right? And
Yeah.
then there's the deeply devotional walk evolving into more of poly spaces.
Yeah.
And that I really believe that depending on how someone's wired, like, there is a reality to have multiple partners, and that is your devotion, and that's the truth for
Yeah.
you. But something has occurred in the field where there's created this like
Yes.
pressure where it's like, but if you're not okay with multiple partners, or that doesn't feel like the truest north for you in a moment, that it means somehow that you're inherently
Yes.
in control or closed, and it's like this fine line of like
Yes.
really everyone getting clear for yourself,
Yes.
with
Yeah.
yourself and with your partner, of what
Yes.
what is true for you and what is true
Yeah.
for us, one step at a time, and I'm curious how that has looked for you and Johan, your husband and
Yeah.
wife, and like, does it go through seasons, and what are you seeing
Yes.
in relationship to like
Yeah.
long-term love? Like, how do you navigate the different arenas of commitment, monogamy, multiple partners? Like, what has that
Well,
been like for you?
I think you're totally right when it comes to that. I really feel that myself. And like, I don't like pressure. Pressure is so not sexy to me. I'm like, I am allergic to pressure. And I also like, I don't believe in rigidity, right? I think there was a little element of that that's sort of been popped into the community, that's like, oh, if you don't want to have multiple partners or be open, then that means you're rigid and that means you're not evolved. And I think that I want to say that you're not evolved enough is really triggering for someone who's on any sort of spiritual path, because we want to we've chosen this path because we want to realize ourselves and actualize ourselves, to bump up against something that's like, well, you're not realizing yourself, you're not
So
actualizing yourself.
interesting. It's like
Yeah.
the conscious new age 20 turning into 2023 version of an insult, instead of like, well, you're bad,
Yes.
or you're wrong, or you're ugly. It's like, well, you're just not very evolved, are you?
Exactly. And we
Yeah.
take it deeply personal. And I think to what you're asking is like, it is just like a moment to moment thing. And you get to decide, as to what you said, for everyone listening, like, your life is your life. Don't live anyone else's life. Live your life. Be in the discovery of your life and let yourself change your mind. That's something that I say, all the time when working with people, is like, you are allowed to change your mind. You are not stuck to one way of being. You can decide one day, I want to have an experiment and be with someone else, or with another person, or with multiple other people. And then the next day, you can change your mind. And then 2 years down the road, you can change your mind again. Like, we're supposed to be evolving. Like, I did a podcast yesterday with Angel, and it's like, we're evolutionary beings. Like, that's what we're here to do, is to constantly expand. And that doesn't mean that expansion point means that we just take away more boundaries, because that's what people make it mean. Oh, if I'm expanding, that just means that I'm free love, I can do whatever, I have no boundaries. That's the sort of the trap that we get into. And I actually believe that the more that we expand, the more clear we are with our desires, which does mean at times very, very clear boundaries. And
Mhm.
I'll say, in the more nitty gritty for Johan and I, it's like, we have experimented with being open. We've had, all sorts of different experiences. We've had really wonderful experiences. We've had really devastating, rupturous experiences. We've learned so much. It's created such deep intimacy and profound connection between us. And I love eroticism, but it doesn't look in the way that we think it looks. It's all different flavors. You can go to a gathering of people that, people, and they say, oh, like an erotic party or a play party, you have this image that everyone's there just like fucking each other. And that actually doesn't sound super interesting to me, and it can just mean being in a space with trusted people with consent and safety where you're exploring erotic energy. And erotic energy, it does not mean penetration. That is one tiny part of it. Erotic energy is the totality to explore your life force energy. And that is so much more interesting to me than sort of like a formulaic way to be evolved. Like, oh, you're evolved when you can allow your partner to fuck another person and you don't get triggered at all. I'm like, fuck that.
Thank you.
Like there are times when you will, and I've had experiences where I've witnessed Johan, in deep intimacy and connection with another woman and felt incredible compersion. And it was beautiful. And it's also rare.
Yeah.
Most of the women that he was engaging with before, I did not feel that with, right? Like, and that was where I got to learn a huge boundary, because the story that I carried was, I need to be okay with this. I'm not evolved enough if I'm not okay with this. And what I realized was, I'm not blanketing this, but the few women that he played with in the beginning, they were not clean energy. They were trying to get in between us in our relationship. They weren't honest, and when you're playing in these spaces of eroticism, like I said before, it's got to feel safe. There's got to be so much trust and so much integrity, or you are actually missing the point of getting in it. Because when it is with integrity and with safety and with consent, then it is fucking mind-blowing.
Yeah, I feel you. Yeah, that feels clear. It's like perhaps the most evolved way is to be allied to your deepest listening and actually
Yes.
honor the boundary, right? Like it's ironic because when you were in what I heard you say, where you were in the idea that I'm not evolved enough, so I'm not going to hold this boundary. What you found out later was, and thank you, because how helpful it is to learn from your walk and potentially not have to go there, right? I mean, who knows, surrendered if anyone listening or myself ever did, but truly, like, that's a deep learning to really tune into, where you didn't listen to yourself and set a boundary because of whatever ideas you had been imprinted around what being evolved looked like, to be cool and okay and in trust with whatever's happening there, when really every alarm in your oracular vision is saying, no, like actually a no to this. And then when you say that's evolved, that's the evolution.
And I will say, to even piggyback on that, an even deeper layer, what I'm just hearing, what you brought forward, which is so perfect, which is the part of me that also wanted to have these experiences.
Yeah.
Because I do desire to in the right circumstance, with the right ingredients, with all the integrity, like I said, it's mind blowing. And so the part of me that was like, well, I want this, but I knew it didn't feel right. And that's where we're like playing on that knife's edge. And that's why it takes all of our awareness and refinement. And like you said, like being in our voice and being like, not like this. And that can be difficult because at times, it's like, you can feel on both ends, like it's never going to happen. Or it's just, are we waiting for the alignment when it does happen and when it feels really good? And like, I remember Johan and I finally having that experience, and we were like, oh, this is how it's supposed to feel. Light bulbs.
Yep. And also just naming, like, this is your husband.
Yeah.
Right. This is a man that put a ring on it. You know what I mean? Like, y'all have spent how many years together?
It'll be 10 years in April.
So 10 years of building all kinds of foundational trust, deep devotion, that I imagine has been a contributor for the arrival in that moment of like, oh, that, right? So I think we talk a lot about and tend to get, I mean, I'm speaking from my own thoughts right now, so definitely not prescriptive, but I think I see in myself in a prior relationship, like getting ahead of myself on the idea that it's evolved and I would have to have the experience of introducing a third energy. And I'm like ahead of where we actually were
Yeah.
in building the trust and stability and foundational rooting in the union itself that I would actually need for any experience with the third energy to feel good, to feel
Yeah.
like I could relax into it. And you need to be relaxed and in trust to feel the pleasure. Otherwise, your whole nervous system is in fight, flight, or freeze. And then that is not
Yes.
access to pleasure. And then even then, for me personally, it would still be an experiment of whether, like, do I like this? Do I
Do
want
I
to?
like this? Yeah.
Was it novel over the course of a decade of being in relationship to have that experience? And you get to probably not have a prescription. You don't know
No.
until it's there and until it
Yeah.
actually feels like a yes. And I really learned for myself not to get ahead of where
Yes.
things really are, and also not to be too definitive, because I made myself a little nutty in that relationship trying to figure out. I'm sure I talked to you, like, what's the right way? Like, how
Yeah.
do you do devotion and allow for there to be freedom and for that to be
Hmm.
enlivening, but also still be in that depth of devotion? And like, is it correct to be in monogamy, or do we need to have an openness, or will it die? Like, I was in all of these questions, which ultimately, when they were coming from that place, we're coming from a fear of losing the
Yeah.
relationship if we didn't get it right. And the
Yeah.
truth is that I've learned is I don't know. I don't know
Yeah.
what it would look like, and I don't know what it's supposed to look like. And I really believe that it's supposed to look like different based on the relationship itself. I know that I desire devotion and I'm more monogamously oriented. And from a certain level of depth and devotion and deep trust that's been fortified over time and like really feels there, I
Yeah.
could be on board with having an experience and like seeing how that feels and going there. And I don't think there's a prescription for that. And
There is not.
it's like, can we just can
No.
okay that we're all women
Yeah.
and just as we
Well,
go, and
I
it
think
might
it's to what you
be
said.
forever, or it might be, oh yeah, let's try and then and no. Like you said, you can change your mind
Yeah.
anytime.
And like the thing that you said was like, is it what's correct? And that's where we slip up.
Mhm.
There is no correct way. There is what is right for you in the moment. And like you said, there are seasons. And like Johan and I have gone through seasons, 10 years, it's like we've gone like, and predominantly we love just being us two. And like we're 10 years in, sex just is getting better and better and better. We're like we're creating universes over here now. And now it's like now we can play and experiment. But yes, there is no correct way. And don't let the ideals of people around you, or a podcast that you hear or whatever, sway you into doing something that you're not ready to do. And I think that brings us back to the other awareness, which is explore first on your own. Like, what feels exciting for you? Get to know yourself first. Get to know your body, your yes, your no. Explore all the different taboos. Then start exploring one by one, slowly, little by little, with your partner. Like, talk about it. Be in the journey, be in the expression, in the exploration together. Then you can actually make a choice that is grounded in your reality versus just an idea in the mind, because that idea in the mind can get us actually in trouble.
Totally agreed. Well said. What a beautiful place to land this very
Yeah.
sexy ship.
Woo! Wow.
With full permission to be exactly where you are and to be in the
Yeah.
discovery with yourself as the safest ally, and with the partners as they arrive that are here to journey with you, and in the integrity of the discovery, right? Like
Mhm.
sexual integrity, and that can
Yes.
look different for
Yes.
everyone. So thank you for your
Hmm.
transmission, Rachel, and thank you for all that you've walked and lived through and learned through in order to develop the perspective and the awareness through true lived experience that you brought to this episode today. I'm so, 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 so grateful. And I can imagine
Yes.
there's many ways that those listening can weave with you and work with you and go deeper into any of these territories. So where
Mm.
can we find you?
Yes, thank you so much. What a epic conversation for all of you listening. You can find me at Positive Pringle on the Instagram, Positive Pringle, like the potato chip. That is my real last name. And you can find me at IamRachelPringle.com. I have lots of embodiment courses, sensual embodiment courses, where we go into this energetics with ourselves in the safety of our own container, which I deeply encourage. And then I also have Tantra of Life, which is all about relationship dynamics with Johan and I. So I think all the tools that you could need are right there for y'all.
And yummy tools they are.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Rachel. This
Thank
was
you
so
so
much
much, my
fun.
love.
And to all those of you listening, we deeply appreciate your receiving and your love. Thank you for being with us today. And I'm so excited to see you next time.